Today, we're going to vibe code an MCP server. We're going to go from start to finish, first framing the problem we want to solve, and then building it together until it works. So let's start with framing the problem. This is Memex, a vibe coding platform that runs on your computer. So it stores conversations and project history all on your computer. We want to create an MCP server that allows Memex to search its own conversation history, search its own project history, look at individual conversations. And this is easier said than done because some of these conversations are quite large. Sometimes there's images in them. So being able to do this in a way that's performant and also convenient is something that Memex is going to have to help us do. To get started, we're first going to make sure that we have the right MCP tools enabled that are going to help us. We won't be deploying, so I'm going to turn off Netlify. These are some previous MCP servers that I've created in the past and that I use frequently. I think the only one we really need to use here is HTMCP, which is another MCP server that Memex created for managing interactive terminal sessions. Okay, so let's start with a prompt. I want to create an MCP server that is able to search through project and conversation history for the Memex vibe coding platform. The conversations are often large JSON files, and the projects are stored in the workspace directory of the user's computer. They are just project directories. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about each of these. What we want to do is allow Memex to do very targeted searches across all of the conversation history and the projects to be able to find specific snippets, specific points of a conversation without blowing up the context of a current conversation. Because these conversations can get quite large, it needs to be a pretty targeted search. As a result, I need you to study the JSON files and make sure that you understand their structure. Use things like JQ to intelligently poke at the JSON files without reading in the full histories there. And do something similar when looking at a couple of directories. Make sure that you're really being safe and not just blowing up your context limit. Okay, we also need to give it to the path. I know because I'm a part of the team that develops Memex, I know that the path is in here. Applications, connect history. We'll say the conversations are here. The projects are here. Implement this in TypeScript. And I want you to first come up with a plan after you've inspected the conversations, you've inspected the projects, and really made sense of the data. Then I want you to just propose like what should the main MCP server's tools be and how, in a nutshell, should they work? How will you implement them so that we have really nice search functionality, faceted search functionality, etc. Think about the agent experience as you're designing the MCP server and wait for my approval to actually begin implementing. Okay, so we're going to submit this prompt now. So whenever Memex is working, I like to review its plans, especially in the beginning, to make sure that it's really on the right track. Whenever it's navigating what I think of as a large search space, I'm attentive to what it's doing so that I can, if need be, interrupt using the stop button or Control-C, and then course correct it, steer it. If it's really messing up, then I would stop it and restore to a checkpoint and update my prompt. Here you can see it listed its own servers, so it can see what's enabled. It sees that HTMCP is enabled, which is the one that we looked at earlier and decided to leave on. So now what it's doing is using HTMCP to inspect the directory that I provided it with. So you can see it is looking at some of my previous conversation here. And now let's see if it's being smart about looking at the files. Indeed, it is. So it's using JQ, which is good for querying JSON objects, JSON query, and it's making sense of the main fields and structure of these conversation history files. It's moved on to looking at the workspace structure. So here you can see it listed the workspace. You can see some of the projects that are here, and then it's looking at some of the projects. What it will find is that the projects are all very diverse. Some of them are MCP servers. Okay, so Memex has finished the proposal for the MCP server that it wants to create. So let's take a look. First, it has analyzed the conversation history, 952 files, and it's made sense of the structure here. And then looked at the projects, and I've got a lot, 516 projects. And then it came up with an implementation plan here. So an indexing system, multimodal search, and search capabilities. And here are the proposed tools. So search conversations, search projects, get conversation snippet, get project overview, cross-reference search, and faceted browse. One of the things I want to make sure it can do is filter by project. So let's see, filters, date range model, projects, min-max messages. Okay, this all looks pretty good. So I'm going to tell it to get started. Okay, get started with this plan, but please, in the first version, limit the bells and whistles. We don't need multimodal search, for example. And we also don't need a extremely sophisticated indexing system, I want you to go for sort of the 80-20 rule, something that is 20% of the work, but gets 80% of what we need in this first MCP server implementation. Is build the MCP server and then configure yourself to use the MCP server. Then use the MCP server that you've configured and installed. Make sure it works across a couple of test cases. And then if it doesn't, fix it. If it does, that's great. So let's see what it comes up with for 80% functionality. Basic conversation search, title, summary content. Okay. File search as well for projects, conversation snippets, and metadata extraction. Okay. So it says sophisticated indexing is something to skip. Multimodal is something to skip. Cross-reference, faceted browsing, and semantic similarity. Okay. So now that it's starting on the implementation, you can always follow along and see the work it's doing by looking at the files in the file browser here. So here you can see it's created a TypeScript config and a package.json for dependencies. We can go ahead and hide that. But if you ever want to see what Memex is creating, that's a great way to see it. Another way is to just look at the files it's creating through expanding these dropdowns. Okay, so after it created some of the main files like the index.typescript, it then added itself. So it created Memex search, and then it listed the tools for it. And you can see it's got search conversations, number of different tools here. Okay. And then it started testing them. So search for conversations about 3D modeling. And it found, okay, a 3D interactive solar system model. I remember doing that one. 3MF file creation, that one too. And 3D printable Mars rover design. That was a fun one that I have 3D printed somewhere around here. Cool. Get a snippet from a specific conversation. So let's see what it searched for. This is just get conversation snippet. I'm not exactly sure what the sort of like a search parameter is for this. Looks like, oh, for a given conversation ID, it asked for messages 1 through 3. Okay, and there are 30 messages in that one. So these are 1 through 3. So you can see it's got custom instructions, and it's got the user prompt, and it's got the assistant response. Okay, project overview. It's able to see for a particular project, the number of files in it, what the main directories are. Cool. Yeah, the technologies used. That's great. And then date range search. Okay. And search for Python files. That's interesting too. Okay. Cool. So that does seem like it's working well. And it is added here as Memex search. So now let's go ahead and commit this to Git. Please create a GitHub repository for this using the GH-CLI tool. It can be public and it can be in the Memex Tech organization. Make sure you've added a nice README. Make sure there's no secrets or anything like that in the repo, and give some usage examples in the README that you create. So GitHub, I highly recommend to use. You can see that once you've created a GitHub account, you can set up GH, and you can just ask Memex, help me set up GH. It is the GitHub command line interface tool or CLI tool. And it's nice because a lot of the operations you do with GitHub through the CLI, you can do with GH. I think there's also a Git MCP server. I haven't used it yet. If anyone has, then let me know if you like it. Okay, so it's created the MCP server. It's created the GitHub repo for it, and it's got installation instruction. Perfect. That's what we like. All right, so 2 things as takeaways. First, if you want to create an MCP server, this is example of how to do it. And if we look, this only took 3 prompts. So we gave it the first prompt of what we wanted, asked it to go through and do the review, come up with a plan. Once it came up with the plan, I said, let's do it, but focus on a simple implementation to begin with, and then asked it to create a GitHub repo. This is the whole extent of prompting of this conversation. And if you want to create MCP servers, especially local MCP servers, this is a great way to get started. The second one, if you're using Memex and you want to search your conversations, then you can use this GitHub repo at the end, Memex Tech, Memex Targeted Search Server. So if you just give Memex that URL and say, hey, install this MCP server for me, it'll take care of the rest for you. All right, cheers.